Somewhere around 2:30 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, a Bluetooth-connected pacemaker inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman stopped transmitting data from a 5-bedroom home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. At that same hour, a man in a ski mask stood on her front porch with a loaded pistol, a backpack, and a plan he believed was already finished. By the time the sun came up, there was blood on the porch tiles, blood trailing into the driveway, and Nancy Guthrie was gone. What happened between the moment that man arrived and the moment he carried her out of her own home is the subject of a single sentence delivered by a retired FBI special agent to Newsweek, a sentence that has not received the attention it demands. The plan was never to hurt her. Andrew Bringwell spent his career inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation working violent crime and kidnapping cases. His professional, measured assessment of the evidence in this case, the surveillance footage, the crime scene, the firearm, the ransom communications, is that the intent was kidnapping, not murder, not assault. A controlled capture with a purpose beyond the act itself. And then something went wrong. This video is not about who took Nancy Guthrie. It is not about the DNA, the ransom notes, the 18,000 tips, or the 1,000 hours of surveillance footage already examined. This is about something far more precise. It is about what was supposed to happen on that porch and the single irrecoverable moment that guaranteed it never would. The most coherent explanation for what destroyed that plan is the most human explanation possible. Now, let's build it from the evidence. Start with the choices, not the timeline. The choices. Every item that person brought to Nancy Guthrie's front door was a decision that reveals intent before a single action was taken. A ski mask covering everything but the eyes and mouth, through which a black mustache and distinctive eyebrows remained visible. A black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, Walmart's private label brand, designed for transporting something from one location to another. A pistol holstered at the front center of the body in what would later be identified as a cheap, possibly generic holster. Gloves, a jacket, long pants, closed-toe shoes, every square inch of exposed skin deliberately concealed. And the timing, the deepest hours of the night, the precise window when an 84-year-old woman who had been dropped off by family just hours earlier would be most alone, most asleep, least capable of resisting what was coming. Hold those choices against what planned violence actually looks like. Planned violence is direct. It does not require a mask because a mask protects identity, and identity only matters if the target will still be alive afterward to report it. It does not require a backpack because a backpack implies cargo that needs to be moved. It does not arrive with the careful, layered preparation of someone who is considered the forensic aftermath, but not the operational complications. Planned violence moves fast and exits fast. What arrived at Nancy Guthrie's porch moved slowly, deliberately. It had layers. It had the structure of something designed to unfold over time, a structure with a specific name in criminal operations and a design principle that is the exact inverse of premeditated harm. Bringwell identified that structure in his Newsweek assessment. The suspect's intent, he concluded, was to kidnap Mrs. Guthrie, but something went wrong. Violence occurred, and she was injured but not killed. He pressed further. If the intent had been murder, the suspect could have accomplished it with the weapon already on his person. A loaded pistol was right there. Nancy Guthrie was 84, living alone, taken completely by surprise. Nothing complicated was required. A single action with the weapon already drawn, already present, already on that porch. That action never came. The absence of that action is among the most significant data points this investigation has produced. The operational framework is called a controlled abduction. Its logic runs precisely opposite to violence. The target must remain alive to hold value. She must be unharmed enough to serve as proof of life when demanded. Her condition must justify completing the exchange, whatever exchange the captor has designed. You do not construct a plan around a living asset and then damage that asset at the threshold of capture. That is not how the plan works. Damage at the threshold of capture is what happens when the plan stops working, when the design collapses in real time and the person who built it is left making decisions for which no preparation exists. Bringuel drew a historical parallel that deserves weight. In 1991, a 25-year-old Alabama attorney named Carrie Lawson was abducted in what began as a traditional ransom kidnapping. The suspect, Jerry Bland, had a plan with its own logic. That plan collapsed. Lawson was killed. Her body was never recovered. Bland took his own life, and his cousin, Karen Lancaster McPherson, was eventually sentenced to life in prison. Bringuel told Newsweek the case still haunts him. It broke on the day his eldest daughter was born. He raised it because the structural architecture between the Lawson case and the Guthrie disappearance is functionally identical. Both began as ransom operations built around a living asset. In both, the plan failed. In the Lawson case, the victim died. In the Guthrie case, Bringuel's assessment is that she was injured but survived the initial collapse. The lesson that connects both cases across 3 decades: when a ransom plan disintegrates, the outcome is not governed by the kidnapper's original intention. It is governed by the fractured decisions of a panicked person operating in the abyss between what they designed and what actually unfolded before them. That abyss is where this case lives. Understanding what pushed it there requires reading the surveillance footage not as forensic evidence, but as a psychological document, a real-time record of a man's internal state in the final minutes before everything came apart. Brianna Fox, a former FBI agent and criminology professor at the University of South Florida, described what she observed in terms chosen with deliberate professional precision. The suspect, Fox told CNN, almost saunters up to the porch as though the house belongs to him. She identified an absence of urgency, an air of bravado, the behavioral signature of someone who has already resolved the scenario in his own mind and finds nothing in that mental image worth fearing. Fox added something that should sit with everyone following this case. This person has not gone their entire life without interacting with others. Family, friends, colleagues, people who know him already know who he is. They just have to report it. Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, analyzed the same footage from the tactical dimension. The way the suspect carried his pistol, holstered openly at the front center of his body in an ill-fitting holster, was, in McCabe's assessment, the configuration of someone who had never been trained to carry a firearm. No one with law enforcement or military experience would position a weapon that way. This was a display weapon, worn to be seen, to project authority, to communicate that resistance was futile, not to be discharged. Read through the framework of a controlled abduction, the weapon's function becomes even more specific. It is the final element in a submission architecture designed to make physical force unnecessary. The mask eliminates identity, the timing eliminates witnesses, the forensic clothing eliminates trace evidence, and the visible weapon eliminates the possibility that the victim decides to resist. She sees the pistol, she complies. The plan proceeds through submission, not through violence. That weapon was never intended to be fired. It was a prop in a scenario engineered to unfold one specific way. The camera improvisation reveals what the weapon's placement only suggests. The suspect attempted to obscure Nancy's Nest doorbell lens, first with a gloved hand, then by ripping a plant from the front yard to block its view. A person who has genuinely gamed out failure scenarios brings purpose-built tools: a hammer, spray paint, a cloth. Someone who grabs vegetation from a flower bed is not mentally rehearsing what could go wrong. He is mentally rehearsing everything going right. The camera registered as a minor inconvenience inside a scenario he had already won in his head. Place that improvisation beside the meticulous forensic preparation, every inch of skin covered, gloves to prevent fingerprints, clothing selected to shed no fibers, and a precise contradiction emerges. He thought carefully about what traces he would leave after the operation. He did not think about complications arising during it. In his internal model, the operation contained no complications. His target would comply. The situation was pre-controlled. He had almost certainly been to this property before. Investigators asked Catalina Foothills residents to review camera footage from January 11th, a date the Guthrie family specifically flagged in their public statement, and one former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindeifer identified as a probable reconnaissance visit. He knew the property layout. He knew the camera position. He knew Nancy's schedule, her solitude, her medical dependencies. He believed he knew everything that mattered. That belief is the hinge on which the entire operation turned, because the mask was never merely a disguise. Within the architecture of a ransom abduction, the mask serves a structural function far more consequential than facial concealment. It is the mechanism that makes a clean ending possible. If Nancy Guthrie was captured, held, and the conditions of her release were eventually met, whether cryptocurrency payment or some other demand, her return depended entirely on one thing: her inability to identify who had taken her. The mask protected the exit. It was the component that allowed every element of the design, the capture, the holding, the negotiation, the exchange, the release, to conclude without a trail leading back to its architect. Remove the mask's effectiveness, and the entire operational logic collapses in a cascade that cannot be reversed. A victim who can identify her kidnapper cannot be freed. A freed victim who knows the identity behind the operation makes a single phone call, and the kidnapper's existence as he knows it is finished. Release becomes operationally impossible. Negotiation becomes theater without an available resolution. Every path requiring Nancy Guthrie to go home and remain unable to name who came for her, every path this plan was built upon, required the mask to hold. The plan was never to hurt her. The violence happened the instant the mask failed. And the mask did not fail because it slipped, tore, or proved physically inadequate. It failed because identity is not reducible to a face. Nancy Guthrie had lived in the Catalina Foothills since the 1970s, more than 50 years of accumulated presence in a neighborhood defined by the kind of deliberate tranquility that accompanies deep stability. It is a community where faces are known, where the rhythms of daily life are predictable, where the people who belong move with the calm of someone who is exactly where they should be, and an unfamiliar face provokes a second look. Nancy attended church. She had the same neighbors for decades. She had the kind of bonds that accumulate only through years of proximity in a tightly knit residential area. The accumulated social knowledge of someone who knows not just names, but the distinctive physical traits of the people in her world. The way someone holds their shoulders, the particular quality of a familiar voice, the gait of someone she had seen 100 times on those streets. A mask neutralizes facial recognition. It does not neutralize the deeper architecture of knowing that operates beneath the visual, the knowing assembled from voice, posture, the accumulated physical grammar of someone whose presence has been absorbed over years until the identification becomes involuntary. If he knew her well enough to know her schedule, her medication, her medical vulnerabilities, the exact hour she would be alone, and the evidence strongly suggests he did, then the question he failed to ask was the one that would have changed everything. Does she also know me? In that second, every planned pathway, the controlled extraction, the holding, the negotiated exchange, the clean release, annihilated in a single moment of mutual recognition. What remained was not a plan. What remained was a man on a residential porch in the pre-dawn dark, holding a person who had just transformed from a controllable target into an unreleasable witness, with no prepared response for anything that followed. Think about what that moment means from inside the mind that built this operation. He arrived with a model that said, "I know how this goes. I have prepared. This is already done." He had studied the forensics enough to cover every inch of skin. He had chosen the timing, the early morning window when an 84-year-old woman would be most vulnerable, most alone, most likely to yield without the kind of physical resistance that would complicate what came next. He had a design. He had prepared for it. He had arrived with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was predetermined. And then she looked at him, or heard his voice, or registered the specific physical signature of someone she had spent years learning to read without trying, and everything that model contained evaporated. The extraction became impossible, the holding became purposeless, the negotiation became a path ending in his own identification. The clean ending where he walked away and she resumed her life and the mask served its function? Gone. What replaced it was not a revised plan. What replaced it was the absence of any plan at all. Behavioral criminologists have mapped what happens when a prepared plan evaporates without warning. It is not a rational recalibration. It is clinical panic, the collapse of every decision-making structure the plan provided, replaced by the reactive, fragmented logic of a mind that believes it has run out of options. Actions that were explicitly excluded from the original design, violence specifically because violence would destroy the leverage the operation required, become, in the vacuum where the plan used to exist, the only response that registers. His reaction, driven by panic rather than preparation, produced the blood that Nancy Guthrie left behind on her own porch. The violence was not the plan. The violence was the funeral of the plan. That blood is now the most important forensic document in this investigation, not for what it reveals about injury, but for what it decisively rules out. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell examined crime scene photographs and focused on a feature most coverage overlooked. There were no voids. In blood pattern analysis, voids are negative spaces left when a body part interrupts the fall path between a blood source and the surface beneath. A person standing over their own blood leaves voids from their feet. A person being dragged leaves directional smears. O'Connell found neither. What she found, she told Brian Enton Investigates, was consistent with someone who was not standing, not walking, not moving under their own power. Her assessment was unambiguous. Nancy was wrapped in something and carried out. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden examined the same photographs and identified a specific morphology: pale centers, donut-shaped formations, the signature of blood mixed with air, the forensic marker of a person who was actively breathing when those drops formed on the porch tiles. Dr. Amy Santoro, a forensic scientist with 18 years of crime scene investigation experience, assessed the volume and distribution and described a quickly bleeding source, significant enough to be alarming but inconsistent with a gunshot or stabbing. 3 independent forensic readings converged. Nancy Guthrie was alive when she left that porch, bleeding from the face or hands, breathing, carried, not dragged, not walked out, not abandoned. Carried. That single word carries immense investigative weight. Carrying is not the behavior of someone discarding a problem. It is the behavior of someone managing a person they still need. It is the behavior of someone who, even in the chaos of a collapsed plan, even in the fractured logic of panic and improvisation, has not yet crossed the line that would make their leverage entirely worthless. She was carried out because she still had value, because whoever took Nancy Guthrie from her home had not yet abandoned the foundational premise of the original design, that she was the asset, not the obstacle, and that her physical condition was critical to whatever outcome they still believed they could salvage. Not dragged, carried. The blood does not tell us the ending of Nancy Guthrie's story. It tells us the precise moment the plan became something it was never designed to be. This reshapes the investigative landscape in ways that matter right now, today, as this case enters its 9th week. A person who executes a prepared plan and exits cleanly has time as an ally. Evidence degrades, witness memories soften, forensic traces cool with every passing day. Preparation buys time. The plan, had it worked, would have bought time. But a person who improvised under panic has no such advantage. Improvisation generates loose ends that multiply rather than fade. It produces the kind of erratic behavioral shifts that the people in the suspect's daily orbit have already started to register, even if they have not yet connected what they have noticed to a headline. The improviser has to maintain a facade of normalcy in front of every person in their life while managing an internal crisis that grows heavier with each week of active investigation. That is an enormous cognitive and emotional burden. And it is a burden that this particular suspect, based on every piece of behavioral evidence from that porch, is not equipped to carry. Kidnapper assessed the broader strategy and concluded the entire early framework, Savannah Guthrie's televised pleas, the family's coordinated appeals, the statement that the family was prepared to pay, was built around a kidnapping for ransom premise. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed to NBC News that investigators believe the crime was targeted, that they believe they know the motive, and that the suspect could absolutely strike again. His willingness to state investigators have identified the motive signals a case that is narrowing, not expanding. The suspect is living inside a psychological profile the FBI understands with clinical precision. Not a professional, not someone with operational experience. A person who every day since February 1st has been tracking every news cycle, absorbing every public statement, while managing the internal crisis of someone whose plan produced consequences they never designed. That is an enormous cognitive and emotional burden, and it is a burden that this particular suspect, based on every piece of behavioral evidence from that porch, is not equipped to carry. Nancy recognized her abductor. The suspect is not a stranger. A person she knew well enough to identify through a mask, in the dark, under extreme stress, exists within a defined perimeter of her life, her neighborhood, her family's orbit, the community she inhabited for over 50 years. There is something specific and tragic in that symmetry. His knowledge of her gave him access to her routines, her schedule, her moment of maximum vulnerability. Her knowledge of him cost him the plan. It turned a target into a witness, a controlled situation into chaos, and every path forward into a dead end except the worst ones. Investigators have been working through that finite perimeter with systematic precision, returning to the Catalina foothills, asking about contractors and workers, focusing on a nearby vacant property, requesting footage from specific pre-abduction dates. The circle is closing. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had a heart condition monitored by a Bluetooth-connected pacemaker, the same device that fell silent at 2:30 a.m. on February 1st. She depended on vital daily medication she has not had access to since that morning. 3 months ago, she described the city she had called home for over 50 years as wonderful, laid back, and gentle. She was dropped off by family after spending the evening together on January 31st. She was alone when someone she may have known came to her door in the dark hours that followed. Savannah Guthrie stood before a camera and said it is never too late to do the right thing. She told the kidnapper's audience that her family was prepared to pay. She described the thought that her own public life might have brought this danger to her mother's bedside as too much to bear. The Guthrie family released a statement. Someone knows something. It is possible a member of this community has information they do not even realize is significant. Those communications were not improvised grief. They were precisely calibrated messages directed at a specific psychological profile, a person who is not a hardened criminal, who cannot sustain this weight indefinitely, and whose only remaining path to an ending without more tragedy is to come forward. Someone in the community surrounding this case has already noticed something, a behavioral shift after February 1st, an unexplained absence around January 31st or the night of January 11th, a remark that didn't land right, a new anxiety without cause, a person whose relationship with news coverage of this case suddenly changed, who became fixated, or who suddenly could not bear to hear her name. The piece you hold could be the one that makes the entire picture visible. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-225-5324. You can reach investigators at 520-351-4900, at 88-CRIME, or at tips.fbi.gov. Every call is reviewed, every detail evaluated. The combined reward stands at $1.1 million. This investigation has not slowed. It will not stop. Subscribe if you are not already part of this series. Every development will be covered here with the depth this case demands. The plan was never to hurt her. She recognized him, and somewhere in the evidence of what that recognition cost, the blood on a porch in the Catalina foothills, the behavioral record of a confident man undone by the one thing he failed to consider, the forensic signatures of a design collapsing in real time, is the thread that leads directly back to the person responsible. The investigators are following it. They have been following it since the morning it first appeared, and they will not stop.